The morning I buried my husband of 38 years, my daughter looked me in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. "Mom, you'll have to take an Uber home." At first, I honestly thought she was joking. The funeral had just ended. People were still standing in little groups outside the cemetery, speaking in hushed voices while the funeral home staff folded chairs and gathered flowers. My husband's casket had barely disappeared beneath the earth. I was emotionally exhausted. My legs felt weak, and my head pounded from crying. I looked at my daughter, Melissa, expecting a smile. Instead, she was already unlocking her SUV. "I have somewhere to be," she said without looking at me. I blinked. Somewhere to be. She sighed dramatically, like I was inconveniencing her. "Mom, Ryan's parents booked us dinner weeks ago. We can't cancel again." I stared at her. "Melissa, I just buried your father." "I know." She shrugged. "But Dad wouldn't want everyone sitting around crying forever." Her husband, Ryan, avoided eye contact as he buckled their 8-year-old son into the back seat. I waited for him to say something. Anything. Instead, he simply climbed into the driver's seat. Melissa reached into her purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and handed it to me. "That should cover an Uber." I looked down at the money. $20. For 38 years, my husband had worked overtime so Melissa could have piano lessons, private tutoring, braces, and eventually college without student loans. He never missed a school recital. He coached softball even after 12-hour shifts. He sold the motorcycle he'd dreamed of owning because Melissa wanted to attend a summer science camp. Now, less than an hour after saying goodbye to him forever, his only daughter was giving me taxi money. "I don't know how to use Uber," I whispered. She rolled her eyes. "Then ask someone." Before I could answer, the SUV pulled away. I stood there in the cemetery parking lot, wearing black heels that hurt my feet, holding a crumpled $20 bill. Completely alone. One by one, the other mourners drove away. Eventually, one of the funeral directors noticed me standing there. "Is someone coming?" I forced a smile. My daughter had another commitment. He frowned. "If you'd like, I'll drive you home." That small act of kindness nearly broke me. On the drive back, I couldn't stop looking out the window. Every street reminded me of my husband. The bakery where we'd bought birthday cakes. The hardware store where he insisted on fixing everything himself. The park where he'd taught Melissa to ride a bicycle. Everything felt painfully empty. When I reached the house, the silence was overwhelming. His slippers were still beside the recliner. His reading glasses rested on the kitchen counter. His favorite coffee mug was still in the sink. I collapsed onto the couch and cried until I couldn't breathe. Over the next several weeks, Melissa barely called. When she did, every conversation somehow became about money. "Mom, have you thought about selling the house? It's too big for one person. You could move into a condo." Then she'd casually ask about Dad's life insurance, or his retirement account, or whether I'd updated my will. I answered politely but vaguely. The truth was, there were things Melissa didn't know. During my husband's final illness, we'd spent countless evenings talking about the future. One night, while sitting on the back porch watching the sunset, he'd taken my hand. "If anything happens to me." "Don't say that." "No." He squeezed my fingers gently. "I need you to listen." So I did. There are going to be people who suddenly become interested in what I've left behind. I laughed. "We're hardly millionaires." He smiled. "No, but we're comfortable." Then he said something that seemed strange at the time. "I've arranged something." "What do you mean?" "You'll find out." I asked questions, but he simply smiled and changed the subject. After he passed away, our attorney called me. "There are documents your husband wanted you to review privately." When I arrived at the office, I discovered my husband had quietly become involved with a local non-profit years earlier. He'd volunteered anonymously. He'd donated regularly. And he'd started a scholarship fund for students whose parents worked blue-collar jobs. I had no idea. The non-profit's director smiled warmly. "Your husband insisted his name stay off everything." Why? He always said helping people wasn't supposed to be a performance. Then the attorney handed me another folder. Inside was a handwritten letter. My love. If you're reading this, I'm gone. First, breathe. Second, don't let loneliness convince you to accept disrespect. Even if it comes from family. Love should never require you to shrink yourself. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred every word. Near the end of the letter, one sentence stood out. You are stronger than you realize. Those words stayed with me. A month later, the non-profit invited me to attend their annual fundraising gala. They wanted to honor my husband's years of anonymous service. I almost declined. I hated public attention. But then I remembered his letter. So I agreed. Melissa never asked how I was doing. She never asked whether I was eating, sleeping, managing. Instead, 2 days before the gala, she called. Mom, I found a realtor. I didn't ask you to. You need to think practically. I'm doing fine. Fine isn't a retirement plan. Then came the question I'd been expecting. So, when are we discussing my inheritance? I quietly ended the call. For the first time in my life, I chose peace over arguing. What I didn't know was that 2 nights later, the local television station would broadcast the gala live. And millions of people, including my daughter, would finally discover who her father had really been. The night of the gala, I almost turned the car around twice. I had never liked formal events. My husband, David, always teased that I'd rather spend an evening planting tomatoes than wearing heels. You'll look beautiful, he'd say. I'll look uncomfortable. He was usually right. As I stepped into the hotel ballroom, I wished he were beside me. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Round tables were covered in white linen, and a small orchestra played quietly near the stage. Volunteers greeted guests with warm smiles. One of them hugged me. Mrs. Carter, we're so honored you came. I'm honored to be here, I replied. The executive director led me to the front table. You'll be sitting with our board members. I froze. I think there's been a mistake. She smiled. No mistake at all. Before I could protest, she whispered, your husband changed hundreds of lives. Tonight people deserve to know. I looked around the room. Teachers, business owners, firefighters, construction workers, college students. People from every walk of life had gathered because of one man who never wanted credit. My husband. A few minutes later, the program began. The Master of Ceremonies welcomed everyone before introducing a short video about the Scholarship Foundation. The lights dimmed. David's photograph appeared on the giant screen. The room became completely silent. His familiar smile filled the ballroom. Then voices began telling stories I'd never heard. A young nurse spoke first. My father was a mechanic. We couldn't afford nursing school. Mr. Carter's scholarship paid for my tuition. Another man stepped onto the screen. I was ready to quit college because my mom lost her job. Mr. Carter never met me. He simply paid my final year's expenses. Then another. And another. And another. 143 scholarships. More than $2 million quietly donated over 20 years. My hand flew to my mouth. I knew we'd lived comfortably. I knew David had invested wisely. But I had never imagined this. Not once had he mentioned the amount. Not once had he bragged. The audience stood and applauded. I couldn't. I was crying too hard. The executive director returned to the stage. Tonight we'd like to introduce the woman who supported this extraordinary man through every step of his life. She looked toward me. Mrs. Eleanor Carter. My knees nearly gave out. Everyone rose to their feet. The applause seemed endless. As I walked toward the stage, cameras flashed from every direction. A local television station had been covering the event live. I didn't think about it. I simply looked at David's picture and whispered, "You should be here." When I reached the microphone, the room fell silent. "I don't know what to say," I began. "My husband never told me the full story." A soft laugh spread across the audience. He believed kindness only counted when nobody was watching. People nodded. I've spent the last month wondering how I would continue without him. My voice cracked. But tonight you've reminded me that love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It keeps living through the people they helped. I paused. And I hope every family remembers something. Don't wait until someone is gone to appreciate them. The ballroom became so quiet that I could hear someone crying near the back. My husband used to tell me that wealth isn't measured by what you leave your children. It's measured by how many strangers call you family. When I finished, the audience rose again. This time the standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Across town, Melissa wasn't watching the gala intentionally. She and Ryan had finished dinner and were flipping through television channels when the local news interrupted its regular programming. Tonight we bring you a remarkable story. The camera showed my face. Melissa frowned. Wait. Then David's picture filled the screen. The reporter explained how a quiet electrician had secretly funded scholarships for decades. They interviewed former recipients, teachers, doctors, engineers, military veterans. One after another they described how my husband had changed their lives. Finally, the reporter said something that made Melissa sit upright. Following tonight's announcement, the Carter Scholarship Foundation revealed that Mrs. Eleanor Carter has accepted the role of chairperson and will oversee the continuation of her husband's charitable work. Melissa stared. Mom. Ryan muted the television. Neither of them spoke. Then came footage of my speech. When I repeated David's words, "Don't wait until someone is gone to appreciate them." Melissa burst into tears. Not polite tears. The kind that leave you unable to breathe. For the first time in weeks, she remembered something she had tried not to think about. The cemetery. The $20 bill. The Uber. The expression on my face as she drove away. She whispered, "What have I done?" The next morning, my doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. Melissa stood on the porch holding flowers. Her eyes were swollen. "I know you probably don't want to see me." I opened the door but didn't speak. She looked around the house. Nothing had changed. Dad's slippers were still beside the chair. His favorite sweater still hung on the coat rack. Everything she'd ignored was exactly where he'd left it. She began crying again. "I'm so sorry." I waited. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because apologies deserve honesty. I was selfish. I nodded. I thought about money. Another nod. "I forgot you lost your husband." Silence. I only thought about what I'd lost. She finally looked up. "I never stopped to think that you'd lost the love of your life." That sentence broke something inside both of us. I invited her in. We sat at the kitchen table. For nearly 2 hours we talked. Really talked. She admitted that after years of juggling work, parenting, and financial pressure, she'd become obsessed with security. When David died, fear took over. Instead of grieving, she'd focused on inheritance, control, planning. She'd convinced herself she was being practical. Instead, she'd become cold. "I hated the person I was becoming," she whispered. "I just didn't realize it until I saw you on television." I reached across the table. "I'm willing to forgive you." She grabbed my hand. "But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." "I know. You'll have to earn back my trust." "I will. And one more thing." She nodded nervously. "If your father were sitting here." I smiled through tears. "He'd forgive you too." That made us both cry. Months passed. Melissa didn't simply apologize. She changed. She visited every weekend. She helped around the house without being asked. She stopped asking about money. Instead, she asked about memories. "What was Dad like before I was born? What was your first date? What made him laugh the hardest?" Together we sorted through old photographs. We laughed over embarrassing hairstyles. We cried over handwritten love letters. Slowly, our family began healing. A year later, Melissa asked if she could volunteer with the Scholarship Foundation. I smiled. Applications are open to everyone. She laughed. So I don't get special treatment? No. Dad would approve. He absolutely would. She became one of our most dedicated volunteers. Not because she wanted recognition. Because she wanted redemption. Every year, before the scholarship ceremony begins, I visit David's grave. I bring fresh flowers. Then I tell him about the students we've helped. About the families we've met. About our grandson, who's growing taller every month. And about Melissa. Especially Melissa. One afternoon, after another successful scholarship ceremony, she walked beside me toward the parking lot. She hesitated before speaking. Mom. Yes. I've never told you something. What is it? Every time I see someone getting into an Uber. She smiled sadly. I remember the worst decision I ever made. I squeezed her hand. The important thing isn't that you remember. It's that you became someone different afterward. She leaned her head against my shoulder, just like she used to as a little girl. Some mistakes leave scars. Some regrets never completely disappear. But love, real love, is stronger than pride, stronger than money, and even stronger than grief. And sometimes, the hardest goodbye becomes the beginning of a family's second chance.